15 minutes ago. She is disconnected momentarily. But, sir, if you instruct, I'm ready to begin.
Yes, we could start. I think they will join.
All right. So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Air Chief Marshal Kaleen Saadat Saab, President Cass, our panelists, Professor Nicholas Ryder, Shakil Ahmed Saab, and Ms. Sayyida Zahra. I would like to welcome you along with all of our guests who are tuning in at the moment on a CAS webinar titled Anti-Money Laundering and Global Security. So, as we begin, we should note that the global economy today exists in two parallel realms. There's the surface economy that is circumscribed by regulation, internationally and domestically, and it has oversight. But there is a shadow economy. It's very large, it's quite nebulous, amorphous, shapeless, and it's growing very fast. Money laundering helps to feed that shadow economy, creates many domestic and international security threats and risks. Some include the financing of non-state actors. It promotes corporate and individual tax evasion. It worsens economic inequality in the world, particularly the developing world, and it helps to sustain organized criminal activity. Now, we've learned a lot about this in recent years through leaks, such as the Panama Papers in 2016, the Russian laundromat soon after, and the FinCEN leaks that were very recent, but they only give us a glimpse of the problem. And what we seem to find is that the main oversight bodies internationally who cover this space have a limited focus, mixed success, and at times, some of those institutions appear to have an agenda of their own. I'm referring in particular to the FATF, Financial Action Task Force, and its relationship to Pakistan. Yet our government has made a very strong commitment to fighting money laundering, and it is making a lot of efforts. So it is time for us in this webinar to give a fresh look, take a fresh look at how we can jointly work on this wicked problem and global problem. Some of the issues that we wish to cover are the socioeconomic impacts of this, what can we learn from the recent leaks, what is Pakistan's capacity, its determination, and its operational resources to deal with this, and the role of international bodies. These are the overarching themes, and our three panelists today, who I will introduce in turn as they speak, will cover different elements of this. I would first like to introduce Professor Nicholas Ryder. Professor Ryder is a leading academic expert on financial crime. He has been a professor of financial crime at the University of West of England, Bristol, UWE Bristol since 2013. He teaches financial crime and regulation and international financial crime at UWE. He serves as head of research and is an elected member of the university's academic board, and is probably one of the best people we could reach out to on this in a global perspective. I invite you, Professor Nicholas Ryder, to enlighten us, and I yield to you.
That's very kind. Thank you very much for the very, very kind introduction, and also for inviting me to participate in the webinar today. So good afternoon or good evening for you. Good afternoon from a very cold Cardiff. It's very cold here, hence the jumper and shirt today. Normally it's a t-shirt. If I may, I'll just share my screen with you and run through some of the slides, if that's okay with you. Okay, let me just do that. Sorry, having technical problems. Brilliant. Can I just check you can all see the slides? Is that okay?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Great. So, thank you for inviting me, and a very kind introduction. So, as you said, I've been a professor in financial crime for 7 years, and I've had the opportunity to conduct a lot of research studies on a broad range of different aspects within the threat posed by money laundering in particular. And what we're seeing, of course, is the emergence again, as you correctly mentioned, Dr. Chauhan, the publication of the FinCEN papers, the Panama Papers, and also the Paradise Papers. But what I thought might be quite interesting for your listeners and readers today is take a look at the United Kingdom and what the UK are trying to do within the global efforts to tackle money laundering, because the UK had a very favourable rating by the Financial Action Task Force in its last mutual evaluation report in December 2018. So what I'll try and do in the next 15 minutes or so is to present, are the findings from the FATF review that glowing, or are there some areas of maybe that there are weaknesses within the UK's regime? And what we've been able to identify through 10, 15 years of research is that not everything is perfect in the United Kingdom. There are very much things that need to be worked on, primarily from an enforcement point of view, but also from a compliance point of view. So over the next 15 minutes, I'll take you through our journey, how the UK achieved that unprecedented rating in December 2018, what the UK government have done, but also to identify some weaknesses within the UK's sort of money laundering, counter-terrorism, financing and financial crime perspective. And again, I'm very happy to take questions from anybody at the end of the session today, or please feel free to contact me via email. A little bit on my background. My research has been funded by various institutions. I've provided a large number of training sessions for law enforcement agencies. So hopefully I'm reasonably qualified to discuss this with you. So the presentation today will be divided into 5 particular themes, and each of these conclusions and findings is based on published research. So these will be based upon books I've written, research funded projects I've been involved in. So hopefully they'll be reasonably well thought out and provide a critique on where we are. So we'll have a little look on the background presented to financial crime globally, but also within the UK. And then I'll specifically outline factors that the UK government has done for the past 10, 12, 13 years to get that excellent rating in the mutual evaluation report. But then I'll critique whether or not the UK's regime is perfect. I mean, as I'm sure you and your listeners will be aware, no regime is going to be perfect to tackle financial crime. There are always going to be loopholes. Just trying to identify what the best practice is. I'll then provide some brief comments and what the main findings are based upon 10 years of research into the areas of financial crime. So if we look at the threat posed by financial crime, I think we can say it's unprecedented. We've seen numerous examples in the UK since the global pandemic of an increase of fraud, an increase of cybercrime, an increase of phishing emails sent by organised criminal gangs. So what efforts are there to tackle that? Well, as we know, we do have the money laundering policy, which is heavily influenced by the United Nations and its 3 money laundering conventions. As the UK is still currently a part of the European Union, but who knows how the negotiations are going for Brexit today, but we won't delve into that today. We have to comply with the European Union's own money laundering directives and related conventions. We then have the Financial Action Task Force, and I appreciate that that can be quite controversial depending on what level of compliance that seems to vary between different countries to different countries. And then of course we also have the international best practices. In relation to terrorism financing, of course, this became a global effort after the Al-Qaeda terrorist attacks in America in September 2001. But what's interesting here to bear in mind is that if you look at what some people call the financial war on terrorism, trust me, it's not an easy term to define, but if you look at the international best practices, relevant codes of conduct, the financial war on terrorism is actually heavily based on the war on drugs as instigated by Rich Nixon in the 1970s. So you have to wonder, is that the correct focus? So it's all of these measures combined, and it's very important that nation states tackle money laundering, terrorism financing, other types of financial crime, and implement a robust legal framework and an enforcement mechanism as well. So Briefly for the UK, in 2018, of course, the Financial Action Task Force published its most recent mutual evaluation report. And the British government claimed and asserted, and numerous press releases and reports since, that the UK's level of compliance is the best in the world. And in order to achieve that particular rating, the pace of reform was absolutely unprecedented. So the British government implemented numerous policy documents, new legislation, new measures aimed at improving, for example, the exchange of information between the banking sector, law enforcement agencies, to try to address the concerns raised by FATF in its 2007 mutual evaluation report. So in terms of the UK legal framework, don't worry, I'm not going to go through every law with you. I'm not going to bore you with what Section 1 provides in Section 2. But if you look at these particular legal provisions, the UK's money laundering legislation is regarded by the Financial Action Task Force as being robust. So primarily we have the 2002 Proceeds of Crime Act, as amended by the 2017 Criminal Finances Act. And to implement the 5th Money Laundering Directive, we have the 2020 Money Laundering Regulations. More agencies have been created, such as the Office for Professional Body and Anti-Money Laundering Supervision. That is housed within the Financial Conduct Authority. And to tackle terrorism financing, we then have the very controversial 2000 Terrorism Act, which I believe the UK has one of the broadest definitions of terrorist activities and also terrorist financing. So the UK government boldly claimed that these particular provisions resulted in the UK having the strongest overall, in particular, counter-terrorism financing regime of over 60 countries assessed. But there are some slight problems within the UK regime. So, for example, the fraud legislation is regarded by many as being best practice, but then to tackle corporate economic crime, which is a very difficult area where if you have, for example, numerous multinational corporations, you have to identify the individual who may be authorized the unlawful act from within the company. So briefly, we have the 2010 Bribery Act, the Criminal Finances Act, and more recently, proposals by the UK government, and it's now been referred to our Law Commission to investigate, and that is expected to report in 2 or 3 years from now. Briefly, we've also got laws to tackle market manipulation, which essentially is fraud. So that would be a prime example of the 2007-8 financial crisis and the LIBOR scandal. And then we have a strong regime to tackle confiscation of the proceeds of crime. And that obviously is currently being looked at also by the Law Commission in its 2020 report. Now we get into some of the more critical commentary. Now, if the Financial Action Task Force's conclusions are to be, give a glowing report on the UK levels of compliance, if you look at it in a little bit more detail, what you will find, of course, is that there are gaps and flaws within the regime. So, for example, the excellent think tank, RUSI, which is based in London, concluded in 2018 that despite the excellent endorsements by the Financial Action Task Force, the UK still remains a global centre for money laundering, and it brings into the question the relevance of the evaluation. And as Dr. Chauhan mentioned in his introduction, of course, we've had revelations with the FinCEN papers, the Panama papers, and no doubt at some point in the next few years, more revelations will be revealed. So you have to begin to question the findings of the FATF report. Transparency International claim that there's no grounds for complacency, and of course they refer to the then recent case of Danske Bank. Now, there's been no action against Danske Bank yet, but the allegations are money laundering, crypto assets, $3 billion. If they're punished by the US Department of Justice, the fines are expected to be in excess of $12 billion. So you can see again that there are clearly some gaps and flaws within the market. More recently, we've had the United States Department of State for Bureau and Narcotics and Law Agencies claiming that London is the epicenter of financial crime and is the epicenter of money laundering. But what is intriguing is that the links in relation to the allegations against Russian money laundering, both of those points have been raised by the UK's own House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee, and more recently in the Intelligence and Security Committee report in 2020. Those you can access via the HTML links on the webpage. So you can see that despite this excellent writing by the Financial Action Task Force, and the government does deserve credit for implementing a robust legal framework, it's far from perfect. It's still very much work in progress. So what we found with research in the past decade is that the money launderer will always be one step ahead. The terrorism financier will also be one step ahead. So laws globally, whether it be in Pakistan, France, Germany, America, Canada, Bolivia, are always going to be reactionary to how people will commit fraud or try to commit money laundering. A prime example, with the lockdown in the UK for the last 9 months, in a week of lockdown, I'm getting texts on my phone saying to me, please claim a tax refund from a HM Revenue and Customs. Well, there's no way am I going to click on the link because it might corrupt my phone. Or so you can see how they're trying to exploit the global pandemic. So what are our findings briefly? So what we have found is that from an enforcement perspective with money laundering, it's very inconsistent. According to the Financial Action Task Force, the UK has a robust policy for its primary predicate offences under our legislation for money laundering. But prosecutions brought against individuals for non-compliance hardly exist. So it doesn't appear to be particularly effective. The Law Commission published an extensive review in 2019. It's over a 250-page report, excellent review that looks at the use of financial intelligence from a suspicious activity report or a suspicious transaction report. Those have not yet been implemented. So we have a great set of conclusions and recommendations to improve how we use financial intelligence, but they've not yet been implemented. Why is that the case? So again, you can see a potential critique there. Terrorism financing, sadly, the UK, I would question the findings of FATF here because the UK has a very much disconnected policy for terrorism financing. So for instance, we've just done some research on the use of fraud by terrorists to finance activities. And what we found are glaring gaps and weaknesses within the UK's policy. So for instance, the fraud policy doesn't mention terrorism financing. The terrorism financing policy doesn't mention fraud. So if you look at the report that we published, again, very happy to circulate after the event, we found multiple cases where people have been convicted of financing terrorism by fraud, but there's no joined up approach. So again, you could see a possible weakness there. So enforcement comes into it. Corporate economic crime, multiple problems within the UK. The current government have admitted there's weaknesses. So again, enforcement. And this is where, sadly, our common law rules of judicial precedent are very weak here. So in order to prosecute a company, you have to find the one individual in a multinational corporation who had the criminal intent to commit the fraud. That's what we call the identification doctrine. Academics, the Law Commission, are very much against that rule, but that's what we have. So what we've ended up with is a US approach where we impose a deferred prosecution agreement. It's a plea bargain between the company and the prosecutor. Do they work? I have my doubts. So I can refer to HSBC and its DPA in America in 2012, where the allegations of money laundering, breaching the UN sanctions regime, highest fine imposed, $1.9 billion. But nobody in the bank was prosecuted. So you can see the practical difficulties of prosecuting companies within the UK. And briefly, one thing I can be positive about is the exchange of information. So the UK is regarded as the best international practice from a money laundering, terrorism financing point of view. So what the UK has are information gateways. So this means that the Joint Money Laundering Intelligence Group, or JIMLA as it's called, is able to exchange information, but on a voluntary basis outside the SARS regime or STR regime. So what you end up with is a super SAR. So even if the information is presented, there's no threat of prosecution or fine for the firm. So according to the FATF report, this is seen as international best practice and has been adopted by Australia, Singapore, Thailand, and America. So one of the things that the UK is very good at is using financial intelligence to tackle money laundering, organised crime, human trafficking, and also terrorism financing. And that is the end of my presentation. My apologies if I've slightly overrun on that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Professor Ryder. It's very informative from that presentation. We learned that all of these best practices being implemented set a high bar, but there are still inconsistencies in the praxis and the theory in the law. And whatever the FATF might say, the reality ends up being different, even when we set a high standard as the UK does. Thank you very much for that. With our next speaker, panelist, I'd like to invite Shakil Ahmed Ramesab, who is a political economist. He previously served at the Sustainable Development Policy Institute for 15 years, including as director for the Asia Study Center. His most recent book is titled Understanding China for Future Cooperation, and he's written extensively on FinCEN, FATF, and other money laundering issues in the Pakistani press. I invite you to give us an overview and some understanding of the security implications of money laundering in a Pakistani context. Over to you, Shakil Saab.
Thank you, Asman, for introducing me and giving such a comprehensive introduction of mine. I never use these words for myself. Thank you so much. And I also want to thank a professor because he set the tune and make the work easier for the other participants to talk about the stuff. Basically, I will talk about, I will not go into the legal stances. I will not go into the legal stances because professor has spoken about it. Either I will try to put forward a few questions for discussion, and these are related to political economy. Because if we have to, from my perspective, we have to understand money laundering. We need to understand the political economy at national level and at the global level, because basically these are the factors of the political economies which make us understand all the different networks, because it's not about only just to go about the money laundering for the terrorist financing. There's a number of other things why the money laundering is happening. Sorry, I have a bad throat, so I was just trying to chew something to keep my throat so open. And to keep that business going on. That's why I have prepared only 2 slides. One will be some probing questions, which I think we need to talk about. Number 1, where are the centers of the laundered money? That is a very fundamental question. Because until and unless we have some space or some, you can say the hidden heavens to hide our monies, we cannot talk about money laundering. Because definitely you have to have safe havens. And where are these safe havens? That is a fundamental question which we need to probe. And if we look at the latest FinCEN leaks, they will talk about that. So they have identified 2 very important, you can say one very important institution and one very important global city. If we talk about a city, that is London. So the number of organizations or different type of organizations are working there, so which seems to be involved in money laundering. I'm using the word seems to be because still we have to find the answer, either they are really or not. But we are sure how many offshore companies are working in UK territory and the role of offshore companies in money laundering. We are sure about that. One thing, and second thing, we can talk about a recent report by the Transparency International, which identified almost 80 organizations from UK, so which were using some activities which gave the suspicions of illegal aspects, and these are being investigated. Now we talk about the banking sector. If you look at the institution, when I'm talking about, if you look at the institutions of banks which are involved in these suspicious activities, are in the past they were being fined. When they are being fined, that means they did something wrong. So they were fined for these suspicious activities. All of them, the leading banks of the West, If you talk about the US, if you talk about the UK, if you talk about even European Union banks like Deutsche Bank. The Deutsche Bank, first it was fined due to the some involvement in Russian scam. So where the 20 billion rupees, where 20 billion dollars amount was being moved from one side to other side, which they could not produce evidence. So they were being fined. Then later on in this FinCEN leaks, it has been highlighted that more than $1 trillion has been moved through the Deutsche Bank. Then if you talk about the other bank, HBS, Barclay, and the other big banks, but these all institutions belongs to West. That means when we are talking to the Western partners or to the global partner, definitely when we're talking, look at the European Union anti-money laundering bills or anti-money laundering laws, it gives a sense that they are the perfect. But then why these such scams are being coming from these centers? So that means there's something is a big thing is wrong. For that purpose, we need to study the political economy of these centers. Why these centers are behaving like that, despite all the facts, they have all the laws and the rules, and they are on the paper, they are showing us that they're willing to apply it. Second question, how to define the terrorism? Because in the money laundering, the terror financing is a very important subject when we talk about, because of what the Pakistan is facing at this point of the time. So most of the time, so they are being portrayed or something like that, they are being accused, they are using very strong words against Pakistan when we are talking about the money laundering, and they're bringing it back into the terrorism. Look, at this point of time, we know that terrorism does not have any definition. There is no consensus definition of the terrorism. You can find different terrorism. But I want to bring an other aspect. If we're talking about terrorism generally, we talk about the killing of a person with a gun or something like that, with ammunition or anything. But what about if some company is robbing the resources of another country or the poor community and laundering that money to deprive those countries or the communities from their basics of the life, and the people are being died due to the hunger or bad water quality or something else. So again, people are losing their life. So then why these organizations who are extracting the resources and bringing the poverty and the conflict in some countries, I'm talking about the poverty especially, and creating the hunger type situation, why they are not terrorists? For me, they are the biggest terrorists, because the impact of those activities is on the life of the millions of people. If you find every year, so how many people are hundreds of thousands of people? If you look at the statistics, how many people are died every year due to the hunger, due to food insecurity, due to the bad water quality, or due to other bad health facilities, because their resources are being robbed and has been laundered to the centers of money laundering. So that is a basic point. That is another dimension of the terrorism, which I think Pakistan needs to talk about. If you have information, you share, but what about these things which are happening? Third thing which I want to talk about is the political economy, which I'm discussing right now. And in the political economy context, when we are talking about the FATF, they are giving different types of the verdicts on the Pakistan. They are not showing any, you can say, any satisfaction. Whatever Pakistan is doing, they say, oh, more need, there is a need to do more. So these are the fundamental questions. Is there anything else which is dictating? If you talk about some people across the Pakistan, or in the recent report, you can say the scam which is coming from the European Union, the propaganda, different websites, or the links are being used by the India. So to disseminate the fake news about the Pakistan, for example, they also use the European Union chronicles. They also use the headlines like that. Keep in mind, it was funded by India. They use a headline like that, follow the money. So from where the money, terror financing money is coming from Pakistan. So they bring headlines like that. And they use the European space, and they use the different types of audience from there to disseminate the fake news about the Pakistan. That is again a concept of the political economy. So they are using this event from FATF illegally to create fake news without any, you can say, using the European Union space, which have all the laws. So that is very important thing. They have the laws. Then why it is not applicable to them? So that's again a question. One is, India is using it for their political goals to malign Pakistan. European Union is silent because they have the deep economic interest in India. So the both they are trying to, you can say one is trying to get the political mileage, other is trying to get the economic mileage. The fourth point is the offshore companies. I think I don't need to talk about the offshore companies. Everybody know about the offshore companies or it's working, but their role in money laundering that need to be probed very seriously, because in most of the times what is happening there, we don't find it what is happening there, especially if you talk about the Luxembourg scam. So what was happening there? They were trying to avoid the taxes and the money laundering, all the stuff. The last thing I on the political on the questions probably want to talk about new avenues, technology. Now we are talking about the digital technology, e-money. We are talking about the virtual money. So these all types of the monies, they give us some sense of the like the facilities like that. Some systems, they are the decentralized systems of the money movement, and you can say the digital currency. But at the same time, it is also creating new avenue for the money laundering, because it seems to be the very safe if there is no rule and regulations at the global level and a system to counter it. We can talk about the Bitcoin, which has some traceable elements which we can trace from where the money is coming and from where the money is going. But through the mixer or a dark net, you can run the money laundering without getting any notice. So that's mean there are the different new avenues and the technology. And the technology is putting pressure on the developing countries like Pakistan, because the Pakistan does not have such sophistication at the government level to have this technology. But Pakistan trying hard. But I am giving a caution to the Pakistani here, so that we need also be very focused on that. Maybe some dark net networking, maybe they're run by some opponents of the Pakistan from a territory of the Pakistan, can be used to blame Pakistan. So that will be the future question. Then my second slide is what is the solution? Definitely, especially when we are talking about the solutions in the time of non-existence of the technology. But now the technology is also here. And technology, digital economy, like I said, digital currency is so much important. The US Federal Investigation Agency, which is dealing with money laundering, they spend the 75% time now, 75% man hours to find the money laundering to the digital space. So that means capturing a lot of attention from them. So that means there's something is happening here. So in this scenario, so what is needed? The first of all, take politics out of it. If we are really serious about to manage it, we need to take politics out of it. If we are just trying to use these events just to malign some countries or to get some political mileage, we will never be successful. Because sometimes you get some country banned, but they can go for another route. The trade, you can say the commodity trade-based money laundering, the trade-based money laundering. They can use the other commodities. Even you don't know what is happening on that side, especially on the diamond and other precious metal, what is happening there. So they can use that. Second thing, we need to be very focused, and we need to make a sensible decisions about economic sanctions. If you put some countries on sanctions for just on the political reasons, that means you are compelling those countries to go for look for the alternatives. Definitely, if there's we cannot say like that every country should follow the same set rules and regulations with which we want them. But no, we have to be very careful about sanctioning the countries. Especially if we're sanctioning the country, we have to take care about their other, you can say the human needs, which need to be taken care. One thing and second thing, when you are sanctioning the country for a long time, they will definitely go for the alternatives like the North Korea. They are using the digital currency for the money laundering. They are using that space just to get the resources because they have been banned from all other illegal venues. They're doing it. Again, I'm talking about the economic section and the politics. Recently, and so Americans, they have taken the name out of Turkmenistan Islamic movement, something like the terrorist group. They have taken them out from the terrorist list because now they are serving their interest. So they seem like that it is good for them to serve their interest. Maybe that is one hypothesis among many experts that why they are taking them out. It is very strange because they themselves have put them on the terrorist list. Why they are taking them out? No. No, it has raised the questions that maybe there are some interest groups are working there. So we need to, that's why I'm saying we need to take the politics out. Last thing, cooperation. Without cooperation, we will not be successful. To point finger on one person or other person, one country or another country will not serve the purpose, especially in the context of the digital economy, digital currency. Because if the digital currency, they go to the decentralization level, where the one or two countries interacting in the darknet side, you cannot find the solution for that money laundering. Here you need the information from the agencies of other countries, which are working there so they can trace them. So we need to be very careful, and that's why I propose need to work on the cooperation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Shakil Saab. We've had two excellent presentations. The second one has complemented, Shakil Saab's second presentation has complemented Professor Ryder's in the sense that we got first an overarching view in terms of good FATF practices and how we see the differences. And the second presentation looked at the political economy elements, including the offshore institutions and digital currency being an important element as well. And so we have two good overarching presentations. And so for our third presentation, I would like to go a little bit more technical, and I'm inviting Ms. Sayeda Zahra for this. Ms. Sayeda is a money laundering reporting officer and head of anti-money laundering and sanctions compliance at HBL Currency Exchange. And HBL is our largest bank in Pakistan. Currently, she is establishing an AML and compliance structure and enforcing a compliance culture in Pakistan's currency exchange sector. She is recognized as a leading subject matter expert among certified anti-money laundering specialists, CAMS, and as a key content advisor for curriculum development in the field. So for a more technical perspective, I invite Ms. Sayeda to take the floor. Over to you, Ms. Sayeda.
Assalamu alaikum. Hi to everyone. First of all, thank you, Usman, for reaching me out. And Assalamu alaikum, Sir Kaleem Sadat. I'm quite thankful for CAS for inviting me to speak over this forum. When I got the invitation to speak over this webinar, I was thinking about that why the armed forces organization need to understand this money laundering topic. So after going into depth and just understanding why it's important for security forces to understand what's going on the ground, then I realized that it's very important to work collectively. Every element of the country should be on the same floor, on the same page, in order to fight money laundering and financial crime. I just want to explain, first of all, I have a banking experience working with the FCC on the core level, and I also worked with the external audit and consultancy firms in country and out of country as well. And now I'm working for the exchange sector. So in country. I have more than 10 years of experience after getting experience in this field. Specifically, when I talk about my country, Pakistan, we have a lot of issues. First of all, I want to focus on the major definition of money laundering. As Usman has said, that I'll be just keeping a light on some technical aspects. First of all, the audience, for the audience, I would like to explain what is money laundering is all about. Money laundering is basically it's a process. It's a process converting dirty money into clean. That's a very lame definition, but this definition have a lot of word in its own meaning. That means basically money laundering has 3 stages. That are layering. First stage is layering. First stage is placement. Second stage is layering, and third stage includes the integration phase. So these 3 stages, when combined together, they composed the money laundering process. Money laundering, it's always important. The origin of the funds is from the illegal illegal source. It's always important to find the source of the source of the fund. So money laundering is an illegal process, and when we define, for example, the terrorist financing, it's not necessary for terrorist financing to have an illegal funds. There can be legitimate funds which inject into terrorist financing. So that is the basic difference between uh, money laundering and terrorist financing. And whenever I've researched many types of crimes working while working the ACAMS organization and IC as well. I'm working with IC as well. So there are a lot of crimes which are happening in the world, but the main what whenever I just think over the crime, I always realize that what is the motive of a criminal. Motive of the criminal is the money. So whenever a crime happens, there's a motivation for the criminal, that is money, and that money is comes from illegal source after conducting a crime. So that is the basic definition. I just give a picture to the audience who should know that what is basically the money laundering. And while investigating the cases, while working with the banking sector and exchange sector on ground, I started my career as an analyst. So whenever I find, you can say, it's not easy to identify. Identification is the main element of the money laundering, anti-money laundering process. So identification is not an easy. We need to understand the typologies which are included, uh, which criminals adopt which criminals adopt to convert dirty money into the clean money, and that is a layering phase. So identification is a very important stage in anti-money laundering process. And I will just give a very short glimpse of the structure of anti-money laundering process for the audience who I think they should know that what are the basic structure. Basic structure includes, for example, the financial institutions and the non-financial institutions uh, working on anti-money laundering procedures and policies. For example, the banking sector, the insurance sector, and the exchange sector, and so on. And when we talk about the non-banking sector, non-financial sector, that includes, for example, the jewelry, for example, the jewelry and stone dealers, and so on. So whenever we file an STR, whenever a financial institution or banks, for example, identify some bad customer on which they have a suspicion, they make an STR report or the SAR report. Okay, and then they pass on to the FIU. For example, if I talk about Pakistan, we are having an independent body, FMU, which is quite famous, Financial Monitoring Unit. So financial and non-financial sector gives their STR and SAR to the FIU, and then they further investigate the case and analyze, and then they forward to the intelligence agencies, and then, for example, to all the potential cases forwarded to the court, and so on. So that is the main structure to execute the anti-money laundering process. So in all this process, I was just thinking about that this is the whole process. I explained what is money laundering, and then what is the anti-money laundering process. Anti-money laundering process. That is the basic concept. So what is needed for security forces, what is needed for the armed forces, and why it is important for them to know about money laundering and anti-money laundering. Why it is important? Definitely, there's when we are in the current era, everything is in a globalization form. So financial, for example, any financial crime which is happening in the financial sector, it's definitely impacting on the high level. For example, if a crime, I would say that that Pakistan is no doubt is having a lot of resources in terms of talent, in terms of rules and regulations. I've gone through the Pakistan's AML law. I've gone through many other laws. They are quite in detail. But what we need is to implement. What I'm having that much of experience. What I realize in whole years is that it's a very important time for us to implement those rules and regulations on ground. It's very important, and definitely it will give some positive result on the governance level and the top levels, for example the government and the armed forces. Why it is important? Because we are in the current we are in that era that it's not easy for us to identify what's where the things are getting wrong. What I realized is that mm, for example when we deal with the various types of transaction in financial institutions, people are not aware. There are lack of awareness. I identified that these are the issues at the ground level which needs to address in order to get results on the top level. So that is very important. People are not aware about money laundering. People are not aware about why they are supposed to submit the documents to the financial institutions, why it is important to give the right information to the financial and non-financial institutions. And definitely, when we know the, for example, the customer, when it's coming on the counter, we should know about who is coming on the counter. So that's very important for the organizations to work on it. And I would recommend that we should work on certain types of trainings, certain types of educating seminars in order to educate the people on ground, which will definitely help a country to get the fruitful result on the top level. These are the I focused on putting on these issues on ground because I realized that we need a support from the government, from the various stakeholders to work on it. And I would recommend that in this area, uh, media also plays an important role to just educate the people why it is important. For example, I will just give you an example that there are a lot of people who are not aware about to return the to file the returns, the tax return file. When they are when uh, they taxing deduct from their income, but they are not still the educated people. They are not aware that why it is important to file the return. Okay, so I mean if we talk about from the external perspective, it looks like people are not submitting the text. No, that's not the case. People are submitting, but they are unaware the importance. They don't know, even the educated sector, I would say. So these are the issues which need to be addressed on a very ground level in order to get results on the top level, and then we can fight collectively as a country in order to fight. For example, when we are submitting our reports, effective reports to the FATF, because now going forward, what we were discussing yesterday in AECAM's conference, going forward, FATF will be working on effectiveness of the rules and regulations. So now this is the time for us, because we have made the rules and regulations, and we are enhancing and we are updating the rules and regulations, as I've been seeing the past 2 years and past 1 year, that rules are getting updated according to the requirement. But what is important for right now and for the future is that to implement those rules and regulations on the ground level, and then get the results for the top level. But if, for example, if we just take the case, for example, I've experienced a lot of cases doing while working for on the financial crime compliance team. On the ground level, we have experienced a lot of issues while extracting the documents, while extracting the customer due diligence information from the ground level, from the customers who are not educated, who don't know the importance of giving the right information. For example, if I'm buying a mobile SIM, it's my responsibility to give the right information to the telecom company. If I'm I'm purchasing, for example, the gold, high volume gold from a jeweler, it's my responsibility to give the right information to the jeweler, to just have a documented. So as Pakistan is having a very the unique geographic location, first of all, um, and definitely as we have a cash-based economy, and especially we are having an undocumented economy. So keeping all these factors in mind, it's very important for us to work on the effectiveness of the rules and the regulations, and to implement, and all the regulators, for example, SBP and SECP and other regulators and the governing bodies on the top level, we must work together to work for the effectiveness of the rules and regulations. And for that, there are various stakeholders need to address these kinds of things. For example, educating people, training of the organization, of the training the employees of the organization working. They themselves don't know why it is important to get the right information in the right document. So we should work. I think it's the right time for us to act in this direction, as we are moving towards FATF implementing phase, that they are just getting how much far we have worked on. So it's a very important time for us to work on. And for example, there I mean, I would recommend that the media can play a very important role. Social media can play a very important role in order to educate people, because now it's very easy for us just to get information on tips. So we should work on it. Yeah, that's all from my side for this specific. I just tried to cover the area which needs to be addressed in the current situation which Pakistan is facing.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sayeda. I think we're very fortunate in today's webinar that we get a multiplicity of perspectives, from the true academic to the true practitioner, and it gives us a good context. Ms. Sayeda's presentation is important in that regard, in that a big gap in our society is public awareness, and there's a role for public information through social media, through public managers and other sources, so that we become aware of the economy as we live it. So thank you very much, Ms. Sayeda, for that. With that, I'm happy to announce that we are exactly on time, as we were meant to be, and this opens up ample room for Q&A. Fortunately, I have already received some very good pressing questions, and I will begin with one for Professor Ryder in this Q&A. So Professor Ryder, Noor Fatima asks that one of the outstanding points that Pakistan has to address as part of its FATF mutual evaluations is to demonstrate successful prosecution and convictions on money laundering and terrorist financing. In that context, has the United Kingdom done prosecutions and convictions that made its score so good?
Yeah, I think that that probably is one part of the UK has adopted a robust enforcement stance towards prosecutions for money laundering, because I think the UK legal framework makes it easier to prosecute for money laundering offences than, say, maybe terrorism financing offences. So the Financial Action Task Force were very much in favour of the aggressive stance adopted by the law enforcement bodies. The Financial Action Task Force also noted that the UK had brought a larger number of terrorism financing cases. But what we tend to find within the UK is that the police investigations, they will go for the, if I can classify it, not necessarily the financing of the act of terrorism, but it's the acts of preparation for terrorism. So the police will, and the Crown Prosecution Service will tend to prosecute those offences as opposed to the terrorism financing offences. So I think that the figures are a little bit skewed, but for me, I still think that there are lessons the UK could learn. So, for example, within the American enforcement stance, the Americans will throw the book at terrorists. They will prosecute them for the fraud offences and also the terrorism offences. So for me, both offences combined would maybe act as more of a deterrent, perhaps? It's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. There is a comment by Rana Siddiqur Rahman that anybody can respond to, and it is that given coronavirus and the economic hardship faced by all the countries in the world to various degrees, a comprehensive solution to money laundering is required, and part of that may be to channelize black money into industrialization. So if you're laundering, are you laundering into productive activities rather than stashing it away? I think is the essence of that question. So that's a kind of a moral gray area, but how would you comment on that? It's open to all of you.
Yeah, I think it's difficult because it's the same debate regarding tax avoidance and tax evasion. So if people are involved in tax avoidance, and the UK has a very complicated tax legal framework with over 2,000 laws. So again, it depends, I think, on the moral principles that the people will pursue. I think what's important to tackle money laundering is that there is a global policy that needs to be implemented by every nation state. But I do appreciate from reading some of the comments that the levels of compliance vary between country to country, and on some occasions that people can be dissatisfied with the FATF methodology. So I can fully appreciate that where some of the people are coming from. But I think that the difficulty is with it's an intriguing point raised by the commentator. I think the difficulty is that I think, as the last speaker said, very, very eloquently indicated, that money laundering is linked into so many different types of organized crime, human trafficking, organ donation, all illegal activities. I wouldn't feel very comfortable arguing that dirty money should be used for property developments or to reinvigorate in inner cities. That to me is not the best way forward. Just my view.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor. I understand there's a lot of nuance behind such questions. Ms. Sayeda, I have a more precise question about Pakistan's context in that regard. You've worked with the banking system here for a long time. If someone were to ask you, how prepared are our big banks for the challenge of AML, what sort of score would you give them out of 10, for example? Are big banks ready for the sort of requirements of AML and CFT?
Thank you, Stan, for the question. Yes, if I talk about this specifically for the bank sector, as I said that I started my career back in 2010, that was the time when the AML was just like a newborn baby. So at that time, banking sector even was under development in this area. People was not aware about what is money laundering, what is anti-money laundering, why we are doing this, why this kind of workforce is required to just investigate the cases and transactions and all that, from sanctions perspective, from investigation, from fraud department, and so that was the early stage. Now, after passing a decade, I realized now people have banking customers specifically. They are quite aware. They are, they trust the banking institution to submit the documents, to submit their, to disclose their basically the income. They have a, you can say, the trust element with that sector. So the banking sector is. I think I should mark them 7 out of 10 because we need to work on the quality now. Now banking sector is quite sufficient to fight this anti-money laundering area and financial crime, but they need the quality to enhance the quality. Now they have to work on the quality assurance area. So as compared to the banking sector, as I'm experiencing the exchange sector, we are experiencing tight regulations from the regulator these days, definitely just because of the FAT pressure. And when I joined the exchange sector, believe me, it was not easy for me. It was literally a challenge for me to change the mindset. I mean, money laundering regulations, I just keep them aside, that what are the regulations, what SBP is saying, what is HBL is saying, what about policies and procedures. I just kept each and everything aside. It was a challenging task for me to change the mindset of the target customer. why it is important to submit that document. And that is the same experience, that was the same, you can say, I faced the same time when I started my career in the banking sector. It was not easy for us to deal with the branches, working for where the people don't know why it is important to submit documents, why it's important if they are bringing a high volume of cash, and we are asking from where you are getting the cash, they are reluctant to provide the information. So banking sector now, they are quite sufficient enough in terms of educating their client and educating their employee. But yes, the same thing I'm experiencing in the exchange sector, and we are working on that. We are educating our customers. So when I past a whole year, it's been more than a year for me with this exchange sector. It was really a challenge for me to even change the mindset of the business people, to change the mindset for thinking of for making a business, uh, from the business, from the compliant business. This distance is not easy. So yes, we are working, continuously working on that. We have to face you can say tug of war type of things, but we are just enforcing the regulations. We are enforcing what our regulator is saying, what the governance body in the country, what government is trying to change in the new, if we can say, in the new Pakistan. So we are working on that. So definitely the other sectors, definitely when the regulations will move on the other sector, insurance and other sector, definitely we will be experiencing the same thing, because whenever a change, there will be you can say a resistance for change. But when we just work on that, definitely will achieve. And definitely, if I think we should think positive. I always explain to the people that we have to work with the world, with today's time. I mean, doing the business past 30 years back, past 70 years back was different, but doing the business now is different. Doing the work now is different. So we have to move with the world, how advanced they are going. So I always encourage FATF regulations. Yes, they are identifying the right things, and we have to work for the better Pakistan. We have to work with the better future, so that we can be part of the globalization. We can be the part of the global, for example, emerging technologies. We have to work on it. As for example, the Bitcoin is illegal in Pakistan. I mean, the virtual currency is illegal in Pakistan because we are not having the regulations. We are not having the technological efficiencies. But on the same time, it's not like that Pakistan is not having the talent. Yes, Pakistan is having the talent. I would firmly say that yes, Pakistan has their own people who can work on this, but yes, they need the right platform to introduce them to work on it. So that's all from my side for
Thank you,
the
Ms.
specific question.
Ms. Saida, you're making an important point about having the regulations is fine, but then you also have to enact a cultural shift, and cultural shift is always met with reticence, especially in such a large country. That might take a lot more effort. That's a very valid and important point. Professor Ryder, there is a question for you, but I'd also like Shakil Saab to comment on this after you. This is from a colleague of ours at CAS, Syed Mohammad Ali Saab. He says that the perception is that the developing world bears a disproportionate brunt of punitive actions in money laundering. So they're punished more than the developed world are, even though oftentimes the end destination is in the developed world rather than developing. So is that punitive regime, does that still make sense?
Yeah, I think this is the key question. I was delivering some training to Jamaican police officers over the past few weeks, and they've been subjected to be criticism from the Financial Action Task Force. And I was asked by one of the law enforcement agents a very similar question to what I've been asked. I think it's very difficult to have, I think, a global set of recommendations which has a fits-all approach. And I think you know, in an ideal world, you'd have a greater understanding that maybe developing economies, maybe even developing money laundering regimes, counter-terrorism financing regimes. It's going to take time to to get up to what would be deemed to be international best practice. So I think that we do have a rather lopsided approach at times, where if the UK or the US is deemed to be less compliant, then what are the actual chances of the UK being sanctioned or grey listed or blacklisted, or America or France or Germany? So I think it is very difficult for emerging economies to comply with the set of recommendations. And I thought it was intriguing that Saida made a very good point, I thought, about the evolution of e-money and cryptocurrencies and virtual currencies. And that probably is one part of the UK's level of compliance, which is very, very not quite there yet in terms of implementing a robust regime. So I think I sense the frustration and share the view that it is slightly skewed in favor of the more traditional, perhaps westernized banking culture. So whether we have a 1, 2 or 3 tier system of enforcement of the recommendations, I think that's a research project, I think, in itself. But it's nothing I've looked at in that detail, but I can see where the viewers, people are coming from. Again, really good question.
Mm-hmm. Shakil Sab, would you provide some political economy perspective on that, the disproportionate punitive impact?
Yeah, thank you, Osman. I think it have to look not only at the punitive sanctions, also the actions, but also look at that, who is the victim? The victim are those countries and the people of those countries from there where the money is being laundered. That's mean on one side, money is being laundered, they are deprived from the economic opportunities. On other side, money has been taken somewhere else. The country who is confiscating those money, that money, that should be returned to the country, because the people of that country, they deserve the better chance, not that they are being victimized. On one side, they are victimized by their own fraudulent people. On other side, the people who are portraying themselves as a defender of the human rights, they are also taking away their money. So that means they are losing, the people of those countries, they are losing on the both sides. One thing, and second thing, we also have to look into, this is not only the problem of the countries from where the money laundering is happening. Maybe we also have to look into, so how the big business companies across the world, they are using their influence to launder the money. Because now we are living in an age of supply chains. All the trade which is happening across the world, that is a supply chain trade. And these supply chain trades, they are being only managed by the big business groups. They are doing the business deals, like I already mentioned, in the Luxembourg scam. They were doing the dealing in the Luxembourg to avoid the tax. Maybe we have that information, maybe something is happening on a money laundering also there. The same is the case with the offshore company. So we need to be very careful. We should not only talk about the countries, we must talk about the big business groups which are also working in the money laundering context, because only those people will do the money laundering which have the money. Poor people cannot do the money laundering. And Pakistan, if you look at the Pakistan, from the very first day, if you look the speeches in the 1947 of the father of the nation, he categorically said at that time, corruption and bribes, these are the ills, because they are contributing to the money laundering. And we had one anti-corruption law in the 1947 Act in 1947 from the Constitution Assembly. So we are working on it from very beginning of our country, but still we are facing the problem. That question need to be the problem, which I put in the earlier my question, the political economy. Why still we are being criticized? And where money is going, but that's why I always maintain Pakistan need to be aggressive. Aggressive doesn't mean that we start fight with the people. Aggressive means we need to bring in the notice to those countries. If money laundering is happening from my country is being punished, then why a country is not being punished where money is landed? Why they are not cooperating with my country? Because if you Pakistan talk to the other countries, or my money is coming to your country, they put a long list of requirements and something like that, and the legal notices or suits, something like that, fulfill these, which Pakistan cannot fulfill. Like any other country, like if you talk about the India, they have the good relations with these countries. So they wanted to bring back their money. But from 2006, they were only able to bring back the money till 2018, 4 crores. You can say 40 millions. And the biggest reason was, they mentioned, the biggest reason was that big countries are not cooperating. So that is not the question just to punish the countries from where the money is laundered. They already have been punished by their own people. And you are just adding the salt to the wounds. So we need to be careful about that.
Just to follow up with you, Shakil Saab, on that, I'm paraphrasing a question by a dear colleague of ours at CAS, Sarashfa Karai, who says, will the UK ever return this money to the countries of origin and risk its own demise or its own economic losses in the process? And then I'd request the Professor Ryder to also comment on the probabilities of returning the funds back to those countries.
I don't know whether they will ever be returned, because if they have to return it, they should make the procedures very easy for the government, because the money belongs to those countries. It doesn't belong to the UK. You cannot hide the money at the name of, you can say, the protection of your business interest. Like that, what happened in the Switzerland at the name of the protection of the privacy. They hide the money and they don't know where went the money. So that's what I'm saying. It's a political economy. It's a political will of the global community. They need to understand one thing: the global community are the global leaders. Unjust system cannot sustain for long. They are facing the problem. They are not admitting it, but they are facing the problem from their own people. What is that problem? That is the rise of the right-wing movements there. So they are what they propagated for so many longs for the globalization. They are facing the reversal of that. If the reversal will happen, keep in mind their market size is not that big. They can compete with the Asian countries. Even they cannot compete with the single country, China. So again, bring back the justice if you want to sustain this globalization system. Otherwise, we are facing challenges.
Realised I'd muted first time I've done that today. My apologies. I think it's interesting regarding the repatriation of money, and what we have seen from cases in the UK is the practical difficulties, and I refer to the former Nigerian dictator Sinai Abacha, who, according to cases, laundered $500 million from Nigeria into UK banks, and it's taken a very long time to actually repatriate that money back to the people of Nigeria. So you have to look at the mutual legal assistance agreements between different nation states, the exchange of information, the cooperation. But what's intriguing with the Sinai Abacha case is that the then regulator, the Financial Services Authority, conducted an investigation and concluded that 15 of 23 banks investigated had breached the levels of money laundering. Not one bank was fined.
Yeah.
So you have that. I think, as I said in my presentation, a lot of it will come back down to enforcement and whether we have this credible deterrent strategy. So that means that normally within the UK, banks will be fined, not because they're actively involved in money laundering, but because they have weak levels of compliance. So I do find it particularly strange where if a bank is I want to use the term professional enabler, what steps will then be taken? Will we ever see the corporate death penalty, where a banking license will be revoked? I doubt it very much, because the UK banks are an integral part of the British economy and the global economy. So what we've seen post the 2007-8 financial crisis is with HSBC and the money laundering scandal in Mexico and the drug cartel, the Russian mafia and so on, the UK government writing to the US Department of Justice asking, please don't prosecute HSBC because of the knock-on effect on the global economy. And all of these letters are publicly available in a very deep, damning report published by Congress in 2012-13. So it's very, I think, as Shakil said, it's very political influenced, which is a pity, because the money, does need to be repatriated to the people who deserve the money.
Can I add one thing, minor thing?
Go ahead, Shakil.
other thing we need to keep in mind, so Pakistan need to work with other countries also, not only the UK, because our major chunk of money is parking somewhere else. So we need also to work with other countries, not only just UK. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a global problem. Thank you for those two important contributions by Shakil Saab and Professor Ryder. I want to first acknowledge that Bakhtiar Hakim Saab has asked a question along similar lines, so I feel it is answered. I proceed to the next question from Ms. Noor Fatima, who previously asked an important question as well. So thank you for those questions. This is targeted towards Ms. Sayeda. That the AMLA Second Amendment passed in September 2020 has seen large wholesale changes to our AML framework, but in terms of practicalities, do you feel that these new laws and stringent measures would result in cumbersome practices as well?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, definitely, they will be fruitful. As they've been introduced recently, now financial institutions and other organizations are combating and they're updating their organization's internal policies and procedures and working according to that. So definitely it will be fruitful. And as I've mentioned earlier, that we are continuously working on enforcing the top level commitments which are coming in terms of rules and regulations to the regulator, and then we are injecting it in our policy and procedures. So yes, definitely we are just working on that on ground.
To follow up to that, Ms. Saida, how would you recommend that Pakistan strike a balance between over-regulating so far as to just stifle business activity and leaving it so open that AML and CFT continue? How should Pakistan overall, not just any bank, but overall the economic architecture strike that balance? And Professor Ryder and Shakil Saab are invited to comment on that after as well. Striking the balance.
Balance between the business style working earlier and now?
Between having too much regulation and too little.
Too much regulations. I didn't get the question exactly. Can you just rephrase it?
Yes. So how does Pakistan strike a balance between having so much regulation that business activity is negatively impacted and being so loose with it that things continue the way they are? How do you strike that balance as policymakers?
No, policymakers, definitely when we are working on the new standards, and when we are working on the new style of doing business, we have to work on that. And definitely the business people, the people who are involved on working on the, you can say, the old style, their business activities, they have to keep them updated. They have to change, in fact, their mindset to work with the world according to the today's requirement. So definitely it will take time, but things will get changed. For example, if I currently, as I was working on financial inclusion, I must say that as Pakistan is having cash-based economy, it's one of our very major problem, because you can say the 60 part of the country is you can say is doing the cash. Still, people are not relying on the plastic money. So we have to bring that sector of the people in the you can say the banking channels, so that we can implement the rules and regulations in the true spirit. For example, if I will just give a very quick glimpse that it's our culture that using and the account for our transaction. For example, if I'm a daughter of my, I use my father's account. So we have to need, it's a time for us to think that we have to work on the direction that we have to use our own channels. So it will be achieved when we work on the financial inclusion and bring our cash-based economy out of it, and so that we can work on the rules and regulations in the true spirit from the implementation perspective.
Thank you, Ms. Sayeda. Professor Ryder, would you like to comment on striking a balance between too much and too little regulation?
I think that really is the key issue, and it's something that the UK has struggled with for ever since the laws were introduced in 1986. The regime, the successive UK governments have attempted to implement a proportionate level of compliance, but of course, for that to be struck I don't think we found the correct way yet. So we've implemented the risk-based approach. We allow certain parts of the sector to modify and develop their own levels of compliance. But of course, then what the reporting sector will say is, well, the regime is burdensome, it's cumbersome, it's too expensive. So I don't think a balance has been struck yet. And it's interesting that the former Labour government under Tony Blair in 2002 noted they wanted to make the compliance regime more cost effective. If anything, the costs have actually spiraled and now excess of £5 billion sterling per year. And now the current government wants to impose a new levy on the reporting sector. So I think the financial sector is in a very precarious position here where, essentially they are financial policemen. They are the front line, like lawyers are, estate agents, realtors. They are reporting entities. So they are that first barrier for the illegal money entering into the economy, whether it be the proceeds of crime or from fraud. So for me, it's about a joined up approach, I think, where the regulator meets with but also engages with the reporting entities and tries to sort of, in the UK, we called it a grandfathering process, whereby the larger firms would help the smaller firms. And I think that worked initially. So maybe that might be a way forward, perhaps, where the reporting entities will work with the smaller companies in terms of perhaps sort of mentor them, to guide them, perhaps in terms of complying with Pakistan's domestic laws. And then if that might be a way then to maybe hopefully raise the levels of compliance with the recommendations. But again, no regime is going to be perfect. It is very much trial and error. As we found with the UK, it's far from perfect.
As we always mention, that risk is you can say, can only be mitigated. It cannot be eliminated. So there will always be a certain, you can say, line of space for that.
Absolutely.
Well said. Absolutely. Thank you. Shakil Saab, a comment on striking balance between regulation and the political economy perspective?
Yeah, I tend to agree with both of the speakers. So maybe the balance is a very difficult question. So how we will define the balance? That would be a very tricky question. Because again, I will put a question. The balance means you have to identify where are the real problem and which are creating some problem. They are leading the money laundering. Then you have to control that. Then rest of the business you have to keep free from so many other rules and regulations. One thing. And second thing, the banking sector in Pakistan. First of all, most of the people, I think, Sayyida Meher, she can guide us. Most of the people in the Pakistan don't open the account. Why? Because they don't believe in the trust system. It is against the Islamic teaching. And most of the other people, they usually keep the current account. So they can say if they have account from the business things, so they can keep it. But by talking about this, my fundamental, you can say, the observation or the suggestions would be, change cannot happen soon. And such change can only happen with a good moral character and the learning from the very beginning. If we only talk about laws and rules and regulations, we have more than needed laws and rules and regulation. We have the more than needed, for example, in the terrorism, in the fight against terrorism, we have the best resources available in the world. You can see the type of the technology, you can talk about the weapons, and so many, every country was on the same page, but still we are facing problems. So my fundamental, you can say, as a suggestion would be, we need to work on the long-term strategy. And in that long-term strategy, character building must be the key.
Exactly.
Must be the key for the students to be taught at the schools, to tell them if they are taking away the money from one country, actually they are doing the terrorism because they are killing somebody by hunger, by the bad quality of the water. It is the same thing, either you kill them with a gun or you kill them by depriving these all necessities. Thank you.
Yeah, I will agree the Shakil's point that we must work on the human development thing. We must inject this thing from the schooling level, that how we have to behave against in front of rules and regulations, because if we are not following the rules in Pakistan or in our country, the same people follow the rules out of the country. So why it's that? We have to think over it. We have to educate our generations, upcoming generations, so that we can work together to get the fruitful result for the top level.
Thank you. I think it's very important to have that character building element. I appreciate that. And I'm happy to announce that we are right on time in terms of the Q&A. And I appreciate the contributions of all the panelists, as well as the excellent questions posed by the audience. We've had a mix of rich perspectives from academia and practitioners that explain money laundering to a layperson audience in quite a contemporary and useful fashion. So thank you, everyone. With this, I want to defer to President Saab for his concluding remarks. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Osman. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir.
Right at the beginning, let me thank our speakers today, panelists, for a very diverse perspective that they have brought for the benefit of the audience. And it was very knowledgeable for us, very educative. Ladies and gentlemen, we had this seminar on a very important and critical subject, money laundering. The issue is important because, as the speaker said, it is an illicit activity that enables many others and causes law enforcement problem and societal distortions. That is why, in his address to the 75th UN General Assembly, Prime Minister Imran Khan explicitly raised the issue of international money laundering and its tremendous damage to Pakistan and the developing world. Prime Minister Khan rightly noted that illicit financial flows to offshore tax havens leads to impoverishment of developing nations. This was the point that was made by Shakil Rame Saab also. The Prime Minister noted that the same funds, if kept in the developing world, would contribute to human development, and the loss of foreign exchange would trigger currency depreciation and then inflation, which are ominous features of the developing world's economic risk profile. The Prime Minister noted that as ultimate beneficiaries of the system, the first world did not exhibit the political will required for change, and cautioned that if this phenomena is allowed to continue unchecked, it will accentuate the difference between the rich and poor. In the long run, the Prime Minister warned that unfettered global money laundering would lead to a far bigger crisis than anything seen today. He therefore called for the UN and major world capitals to take the lead in creating global framework to counter money laundering. Noting these critical points, the current government has laid due emphasis on the magnitude of the problem. Our webinar today reflects the importance that Pakistan must give to the challenge ahead. The interesting presentations and Q&A today of today's webinar brings 4 important conclusions to the fore. 1, financial institutions, a point made by also Saida Zahra. Financial institutions, especially banks, are used for money laundering. Criminal entities have found loopholes in every industry to create layers for money laundering. Banks have a major risk because they are used in all stages of money laundering. E-commerce and real estate are other domains which are attractive to money launderers. 2, money laundering is a global problem, and there is no one country that can solve it alone. It requires coordination and cooperation. In that sense, it is similar to other wicked problems, like Dr. Osman said, that require multiple stakeholders working together around the world. 3, Pakistan cannot and should not ignore the economic and security risks posed by money laundering. Having a strong, dynamic, and well-regulated financial system is in Pakistan's longer-term interest. Again, this point was made by Syed Mer Zahra. Whether the FATF pressurizes us or not, it is in the national interest to assume this responsibility. 4, contrary to international perceptions, there is an anti-money laundering expertise available in Pakistan. and Saida Meher Zahra personifies that, with major entities including banks taking the task very seriously. As major news leaks such as FinCEN have shown, the effort to combat money laundering is an ongoing one, but the challenge is daunting for all countries, not just for Pakistan. A notable contribution of today's proceedings is the greater nuances have been highlighted regarding the flow and stock of money laundering in the world. The presentations made today, as well as the Q&A, help to emphasize the urgency that the government of Pakistan has accorded to the issue. However, it also emerges from the foregoing discussion that this is not a problem that can be addressed by a single country on its own. Money laundering, in my opinion, is akin to bribery. Both the giver and the taker benefit. There was this discussion going on, who is more responsible, whether the launderer or the beneficiary in the West. Actually, we want justice, but that is hard to find in this world. We live in an unfair world, so we have to learn to live with that, but do the best that we can. That is why the challenge is so great. Of late, depositors and investors are being asked about the sources of money, whether it has been earned legally and legitimately or not. This also, one experiences, again, a good point made by, say, Meher Zahra, that people need to be made aware why it is important to provide correct information. But I guess I also was shocked when, every 6 months they send me a letter asking me, are you still employed? Are you still getting your salary? If yes, please send us the documents, etc. And the funny thing is that I said, please close my account if you don't trust me. They said, no, we want to hold your account, but we want you to give us the proper documents. I said, but I don't want to go through this cumbersome process. But they were insistent. Anyway, to cut the long story short, I had to furnish them the proper documents. So also along the 3 stages of money laundering, placement, layering, and integration, there are many beneficiaries. So they would try their best to guard their interest, and wherein lies the complication. However, another point that I want to make is that the urgency with which the punitive efforts of the FATF are applied, its effect appear to be counterproductive, since they produce the adverse economic conditions in which money laundering becomes not just an option, but a viable alternative if the formal economy is paralyzed, a point made by Mr. Shakil Rame too. Furthermore, the treatment of FATF towards Pakistan does not reflect the magnitude of money laundering in the country, especially when compared to the size of fund flows in major financial capitals. There are many other developing countries that have a more checkered track record of money laundering and terrorist financing. The government of Pakistan has released a recent dossier of terrorist activities funded by India over the past decade. And it shows that terror financing has been of a large scale and has drawn in many terrorist groups based in Afghanistan into the web. It seems puzzling the FATF would not put sanctions on a country that is so blatantly involved in precisely the sorts of activities that it has been mandated to fight. The other concern is that alluded to by the 2 speakers is that the global financial and regulatory system has too many loopholes and backroads that nefarious actors use. The Panama Papers, FinCEN leaks, Russian laundromat, and other unexpected disclosures have shown that FATF and other agencies are not properly focused on the big picture. Today's webinar has sought to address both the larger picture as well as the concerns specific to Pakistan. Since the subject is characterized by many technicalities and much specialization, a discussion of the length accorded today will naturally be insufficient to cover all necessary ground. The webinar has, however, given a useful indication of the gravity of the problem and the means by which it may be approached, especially in Pakistan. It has to be realized that an agrarian, largely undocumented economy fueled by cash cannot overnight become compliant with contemporary developed world standards. The effort that Pakistan is making is sincere, and financial dealings transformation needs time to bear fruit. The intent is right, and the same is expected from the recipients of laundered money in the West. The United Kingdom and some other countries have begun to ask people buying properties or expensive goods the sources of their monies. The challenge is for the long haul, because the beneficiaries of this illicit business would try to stay a step ahead in dodging the system, a point made by Professor Ryder too. With that, ladies and gentlemen, on your behalf and on the behalf of CAS, I wish to thank Professor Nicholas Ryder, Mr. Shakil Rame, Ms. Saida Meherzara for their fine contribution to our learning this evening and for taking time out and devoting their time to our benefit. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good day, have a good evening, night, wherever you are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Khuda Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz. Well done,
Thank you, sir.
Usman.
Thank you, sir.